In the age before telescopes and laboratories, before the word science had meaning to the common man, the medieval world looked to the heavens, the beasts and the bones for answers. It was a time when truth was hidden behind mystery, when fate was not measured in equations but in science. People walked beneath cathedrals and castle walls believing the universe whispered secrets. If only one knew how to listen. A farmer would pause his plough at the sight of a raven circling above. To him, it was no mere bird, it was a message. The old woman in the village square would whisper that it meant death was near. A child's laughter carried on the wind could mean good fortune. The flicker of a candle flame, the way it bent or struggled against still air, all these were omens. For the medieval mind, the future was not something to discover. It was something to read. The world was a living book, written in symbols by God himself. Every storm, every illness, every dream was part of a language older than words. The educated called it divination. The villagers called it knowing. Monks copied ancient manuscripts that spoke of prophecies from Babylon and Rome. Astrologers in candlelit chambers drew maps of the stars, believing that Jupiter's dance with Saturn foretold the birth of kings or the fall of empires. But outside monastery walls, peasants turned to earth and flame, to the bleating of goats or the shape of clouds for guidance. A merchant would not set sail until he had consulted the weather witch. An old crone said to speak to the wind. Soldiers would not march to war until the augur had read the entrails of a freshly slaughtered boar. The rhythm of the world was one of ritual and belief, where superstition was survival and curiosity was devotion. In a small English village, deep in the 13th century, a woman named Elwyn sat by her hearth with a bowl of water. She stared into its still surface, until her reflection blurred. Villagers called her a seer, neither witch nor saint. When the reflection rippled, she saw a shadow of fire in the east. Days later, the blacksmith's forge burned to the ground. They said Elwyn had seen it coming. Such stories spread across kingdoms, whispered in taverns and markets. She has the sight, people said. She knows what is to come. Whether it was blessing or curse, none could say. But in a world without reason, faith filled the gaps. People needed certainty, and in omens they found comfort. At night, beneath the vault of unpolluted stars, villagers watched constellations move like divine handwriting. To them, the heavens were alive, the moon a goddess, the comets her messengers. They did not yet know of gravity or galaxies. They saw intention in everything. Lightning was God's anger, drought his silence, and rain his forgiveness. The church both feared and fed this hunger for prediction. Priests condemned fortune-tellers as heretics, but secretly consulted them. Kings banned astrology in public, yet paid gold to private star readers in their courts. Power loved knowledge, even when that knowledge came from the unknown. One such king, Philip of France, was said to have a secret astrologer who warned him never to travel north. On the 13th day of any month, when Philip ignored the warning in 1307, he fell ill within a week. The astrologer was executed, but whispers remained that fate itself had been mocked. Even dreams were not free from prophecy. A miller's wife who dreamed of falling teeth would wake screaming, knowing it meant death in the family. A man who dreamt of fish believed riches were coming. To dream of a storm meant betrayal. Entire books, called dream manuals, were passed from hand to hand, filled with symbols and meanings, copied by monks who claimed to translate wisdom from ancient Egypt or the East. The medieval world was not blind, it simply saw differently. It looked not through lenses, but through faith. It was a tapestry woven with fear, reverence, and imagination. When the plague swept through Europe, killing millions, many believed the stars had foretold it. Others thought it was divine punishment. Few sought logic, for logic was powerless against death. In every dark corner of a village, in every monastery tower, there were those who searched for signs of tomorrow. They read the flight of crows, the shape of spilled wax, the way smoke curled from a candle. They believed the world itself wanted to speak, and so it did to those willing to listen. But among all these believers, there were a few who questioned. They wondered not just what the omens meant, but why they worked. These were the quiet thinkers, the forgotten bridge between mysticism and science, those who would one day give birth to reason itself. The story of how medieval people predicted the future is not just about superstition. It's about humanity's endless need to know what lies ahead. It's about fear and hope, control and chaos. In a world ruled by darkness, they sought light in every shadow. And in that search, whether through bones, stars, or dreams, they found something timeless, the belief that the future, though unseen, could always be touched. Long before the age of telescopes, the night sky was the greatest book ever written. Every star was a letter, every constellation a word, every movement a sentence in the divine language of fate. To the medieval mind, the stars did not merely exist, they ruled. They shaped destinies, decided wars, chose kings, and marked the hour of death. The people of the Middle Ages believed the heavens were not random. They were a perfect reflection of divine will. To understand the stars was to understand the mind of God himself. Astrology, in its purest form, was not considered a superstition but a science, the highest and holiest of all sciences. Universities in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford taught it with reverence. Kings had astrologers, popes consulted horoscopes, and even crusaders planned their campaigns according to the stars. The boundary between faith and astronomy was blurred beyond recognition. To gaze upward was to seek truth. At the heart of this celestial devotion were the star prophets, astrologers who claimed they could read the will of heaven. Men like Guido Branotti, John of Essendon, and Michael Scott became legends of prediction. They studied ancient Arabic manuscripts that traced back to scholars of Baghdad and Alexandria, who in turn inherited knowledge from Babylon. To them, the universe was a clock, vast, intricate, and precise, and by its movement, all human life could be measured. The medieval astrologers' tools were humble but sacred: parchment charts, brass astrolabes, compasses of bone, and candlelight. In darkened rooms, they mapped the sky, marking the positions of planets as though sketching divine instructions. Each star had meaning. Mars brought war, Venus brought love, Saturn carried sorrow. Jupiter bestowed wisdom, and the moon, ever-changing, governed emotions and madness alike. To common folk, astrology was magic. To kings, it was strategy. When Henry II of England faced rebellion, his astrologer warned him of a dark conjunction, a dangerous alignment of planets in Scorpio. Henry delayed his march, and a sudden storm destroyed the enemy's camp. With a coincidence or prophecy, the legend of the astrologer grew. In Florence, Catherine de' Medici, queen and patron of mystics, kept the famous Nostradamus by her side. He foretold plagues, wars, and the deaths of monarchs with words so cryptic they seemed both divine and dreadful. To his followers, he was a prophet; to his enemies, a charlatan. Yet, his predictions, cloaked in riddle and metaphor, would echo across centuries, convincing millions that the future could indeed be seen. Astrology's power extended even into the church, though priests denounced fortune-telling. As heresy, many secretly believed the stars were God's instruments. The heavens, after all, were his creation. Why would he not use them to communicate? Monks spent nights charting constellations, disguising astrology as astronomy in their writings. The line between faith and forbidden knowledge was a narrow one, and it shimmered like moonlight on glass. Astrologers were both revered and feared. When their predictions proved true, they were hailed as saints of the sky. When they failed, they were accused of sorcery, even witchcraft. Many walked a perilous path, loved by rulers, hunted by the church, envied by rivals. In cities like Prague, Paris, and Toledo, they gathered in secret, forming guilds that protected their methods. There they studied in silence, decoding celestial mysteries handed down from the ancients. The art was not merely to predict, but to interpret. A skilled astrologer could not only foresee a drought, but tell which noble family it would ruin. He could look upon a newborn child and declare his destiny, greatness or misery, based on the hour of his birth. To medieval people, free will was a comforting illusion. The stars, they believed, had already written their fates, but not all astrologers agreed. Some believed the stars only influenced life, not controlled it. They saw the heavens as a mirror, reflecting tendencies, not commands. The stars incline, said Branotti. They do not compel. Yet kings preferred certainty over nuance. They wanted answers, not philosophy, and so the astrologers gave them what they desired. In one fateful night in 1345, 3 great planets aligned in Aquarius: Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, an event unseen in living memory. Astrologers across Europe warned of catastrophe. Within 2 years, the Black Death swept across the continent, killing millions. The heavens have spoken, people cried. The stars have judged us, whether science or coincidence. Astrology's power became gospel. The sky itself seemed to confirm their fear. Yet beneath this grand belief lay quiet rebellion. In monasteries, a few scholars began to doubt. They noticed inconsistencies, prophecies that failed, charts that contradicted, predictions that defied reason. Some began to wonder if the stars were not dictating fate, but following laws invisible. Mathematical laws, these were the first whispers of change, the dawn of what would one day be called science. But for now, in the candlelight of medieval Europe, the astrologer remained king of the unknown. His word could calm a crowd or doom a nation. His charts hung beside crucifixes in royal chambers. His gaze pierced through the darkness of ignorance, or so people believed, and while peasants prayed for miracles, kings prayed for favorable constellations, because in their hearts they all believed the same thing, that the stars held answers mere mortals could never truly understand. The medieval world looked up and saw destiny written across the sky, bright and eternal. They didn't need telescopes or theories. All they needed was belief, and belief in those days was stronger than any science. In a world without science, dreams were more than flickers of the sleeping mind. They were messages. To the medieval people, the boundary between the real and the unseen was thin, like morning mist over a graveyard. Every dream was a whisper from heaven or a warning from hell. What modern minds would dismiss as imagination, they regarded as revelation. The night was not just for rest, it was for prophecy. From peasant huts to royal chambers, dreams held authority greater than kings. People believed God spoke through visions, angels appeared in slumber, and the dead crossed the veil to deliver truth. Even the simplest farmer would wake trembling after a strange dream, rush to the village priest, and demand its meaning. It was not a dream, he'd say. It was a sign. Dream interpreters, known as oneirocritics, became guides through the invisible world. They were not priests nor healers, but a mysterious blend of both. Many were monks who studied ancient dream books, especially the Somniel Danielus, a manuscript claiming to trace back to the prophet Daniel. These guides believed that the soul, when freed from the body during sleep, could wander beyond the earth and witness fragments of divine truth. The Somniel Danielus was their sacred compass. It listed thousands of symbols. A lion meant victory, a snake betrayal, a bird freedom, and water foretold change or death depending on its clarity. It was not superstition to them, it was sacred knowledge passed through generations, tested by time and terror alike. Monks would keep records of recurring dreams among the faithful. A child dreaming of falling stones, a noblewoman dreaming of black birds, all entered carefully in illuminated manuscripts. When plague struck or famine spread, the interpreters compared dreams across regions. Convinced the collective unconscious was crying out before disaster, the church had an uneasy relationship with dreams. On one hand, scripture was filled with divine visions, Joseph's warnings in Egypt, Daniel's interpretations for kings, even Mary's angelic visitations. On the other, dreams could tempt heresy, leading souls away from obedience into delusion. The line between revelation and blasphemy was thin, and the dreamers who crossed it often paid dearly. Still, kings and popes sought guidance from dream interpreters in secret. Before great wars, monarchs would confess their dreams to their advisors. A crowned serpent, a burning crown, a black eclipse. The interpreters would whisper their meanings: treachery, loss, death. Sometimes, a king would cancel an entire campaign because of a dream. The invisible world ruled the visible one. One of the most famous medieval visionaries was Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess whose dreams she described as living light. Her visions combined theology, medicine, and cosmic order, portraying the universe as a living body where every part echoed divine harmony. Her writings were so vivid that even bishops sought her counsel. Yet she claimed her knowledge came not from books but from dreams. The voice said to me, she wrote, "Write what you see." Another was Joan of Arc, a teenage peasant girl who claimed heavenly voices spoke to her in dreams and waking visions. She said saints guided her to save France. The church, torn between awe and fear, could not decide whether she was chosen or cursed. Her voices led her to victory, but also to the stake. When the flames rose around her, she cried, "My voices were of God." Even in death, her visions reshaped a nation's destiny. Ordinary people, too, sought meaning in their nightly journeys. Dream amulets became common, small charms worn to invite good visions and repel nightmares. The most popular was the hagstone, a rock with a natural hole in it, believed to let one see through to the spirit world. Mothers hung them above their children's cradles to keep away night hags, dark spirits said to sit upon sleepers' chests and steal their breath. There were also dream bowls filled with herbs like mugwort, valerian and thyme, believed to bring prophetic dreams when placed under the bed. Travelers carried small crosses made of rowan wood to ensure their dreams remained pure on the road. Sleep itself became a ritual, a moment of surrender to forces unseen, but deeply trusted. Some dreams were shared, entire villages reporting the same vision of fire, flood, or war. Chroniclers called them collective dreams, proof that God spoke not to individuals but to all of mankind. When Halley's comet appeared in 1066, countless people dreamt of falling stars and burning crowns. Soon after, William the Conqueror invaded England. The dreams had foretold it. They said, the sky had spoken first. Dreams were also used as evidence in trials. In some courts, witnesses claimed the spirit of the murdered had appeared in a dream to name their killer. Judges, fearing divine wrath, often allowed such visions as testimony. It was not uncommon for an accused man to be condemned because of a widow's dream. The unseen world held power even over law. But not all dream readers were holy. In shadowed alleys and hidden markets, charlatans sold dream potions, mixtures of herbs and powders promising glimpses of the future. Some whispered forbidden words over sleeping bodies to summon visions, others claimed to command spirits that revealed fate. Many of these were later accused of witchcraft and burned, yet the belief never faded. For every interpreter silenced, 10 more rose. In monasteries, the study of dreams began to merge with early psychology. Some monks noticed patterns, fear caused nightmares, guilt brought visions of fire, love summoned images of light. They started to suspect that dreams might not come from heaven or hell, but from within the soul itself. It was a quiet heresy, the birth of introspection. But such thoughts were dangerous. To suggest that a dream was merely human was to deny the divine. Still, the dream books grew thicker, the interpretations richer. By the late 14th century, dream reading had evolved into an art form, a fusion of scripture, superstition, and philosophy. People no longer asked if dreams were real, they only asked how to read them. A peasant's nightmare could alter a village's fate, a queen's dream could change the course of a kingdom. And while no one could truly explain why dreams came, everyone agreed they meant something. To medieval people, the mind was not a prison, it was a bridge between earth and eternity. Every dream was a question, and every morning, the interpreters searched for the answer in fading memory, candle smoke, and scripture. The night held secrets the day could never uncover, and as long as they dreamed, the people believed they were never alone in the dark. In the bustling markets of medieval towns, among the spice traders, blacksmiths, and cloth sellers, there were always those who didn't sell goods, but glimpses of destiny. They sat beneath patched tents or by the stone wells, cloaked in mystery and whispers, offering answers not found in scripture or science. They were the fortune tellers, the palm readers, the star watchers, and the travelers who claimed to see the invisible threads of fate. To the medieval mind, the future was not hidden by time. It was veiled by faith, and these wanderers knew how to lift that veil. Palmistry, or chiromancy, was one of the oldest and most respected forms of divination. It was said to have come from the East, from India or Persia, brought to Europe by scholars and travelers long before the Crusades. Medieval people believed that the human hand was a divine map, etched with signs of God's plan. Each line was a river of destiny, flowing from birth to death. The palmists studied the mounts and markings as if they were sacred texts. The line of life, curving around the thumb, told of vitality and longevity. The line of heart spoke of love and compassion. The line of fate, often faint, revealed fortune, tragedy, and divine will. People would travel miles to have their palms read. Peasants brought calloused hands. Nobles brought jeweled ones, and each wanted the same thing, to know what awaited them. Will my crops thrive? Will I bear a son? Will my husband return from war? The palmist would trace the lines slowly, murmuring prayers under their breath, and deliver answers that could shape lives. A good reading could bring hope. A bad one could plant fear that lingered for years. Palmistry manuals began to appear in secret. Many were hand-copied, illustrated with diagrams of hands, showing each line and its meaning. Some blended astrology with palmistry, claiming that the position of the stars when a person was born determined the way their lines formed. To the church, such blending of fate and flesh bordered on blasphemy. But to the common people, it was comfort. In a world ruled by plague, famine, and war, the idea that your life had a pattern, that it could be read, was a kind of mercy. Traveling fortune-tellers, often Romani or other nomadic groups, became fixtures of fairs and festivals. They were both feared and revered. Their bright scarves, jingling coins, and foreign tongues fascinated the townsfolk. Some saw them as blessed with ancient wisdom, others whispered that they consorted with demons. Their tents smelled of herbs, incense, and smoke inside. A single candle burned beside a bowl of water, a mirror, or a deck of strange painted cards, precursors to the tarot that would come centuries later. These wanderers read signs in everything, in the flight of birds, the flicker of flame, the way wax dripped from a candle. A woman might come seeking love, and the fortune-teller would drop oil into water, reading the ripples as symbols of union or heartbreak. A merchant might ask about his journey, and the fortune-teller would toss bones or polished stones, watching how they landed to divine luck or danger. Every motion held meaning. Nothing was random, but fortune-telling was not without risk. The church viewed such practices as attempts to rival divine will. Those caught reading palms or casting lots could be branded heretics or witches. Yet even priests in secret sometimes sought them out. It was said that before major battles, commanders would disguise themselves and visit fortune-tellers to know if their army would prevail. The future, after all, was too heavy a burden to bear without some hint of what it held. The art of geomancy, reading patterns in the earth, became especially popular in the 12th century. Practitioners would cast handfuls of sand or pebbles and interpret the patterns according to complex charts. To medieval minds, the earth itself spoke if you knew how to listen. Dust thou art, the Bible said, and geomancers believed that dust still carried divine messages. There were also physiognomists who claimed they could read fate in faces. A wide forehead meant wisdom, a crooked nose hinted at deceit, and a dimpled chin suggested good fortune. Such beliefs seeped into courtly life. Even kings began choosing advisors or brides based on the signs in their faces. Love and politics became games of divination. Despite persecution, fortune-tellers thrived because their art filled a void science had not yet claimed. They offered certainty in chaos, order in fear. A farmer whose harvest failed could find hope in a promise that next year's stars would favor him. A widow could hear that her husband watched over her from beyond. A dying man could find peace believing his suffering was written in the stars and soon to end. Some fortune-tellers became legends. There was Mother Shipton of England, born in the late 1400s, said to have prophesied great fires, wars, and even inventions that would come centuries later. Though the church condemned her as a witch, commoners called her the voice of the earth. In France, Michel de Nostradame, better known as Nostradamus, would rise in the 16th century as the culmination of this long tradition. A man who turned medieval fortune-telling into written prophecy that would echo through ages. But long before Nostradamus, these nameless wanderers shaped how people understood fate. They blurred the line between religion and superstition, between fear and faith. They traveled from one village to the next, leaving behind stories, omens, and hope. To some, they were charlatans. To others, saints in disguise. When night fell over the cobblestone streets, people whispered about them. The old woman who knew when someone would die. The dark-eyed man who could make your ring spin if your lover was unfaithful. The girl who could look into water and see distant lands. They lived on the edges of society, not trusted, but never forgotten. Even when the plague came and death walked in every home, the fortune-tellers did not flee. They stood in the marketplaces and said, "It was written." The stars spoke of this, and somehow that made the terror bearable. Because if suffering had been foretold, then perhaps it also had an end. Medieval people believed that fate was not cruel, only mysterious. The fortune-tellers were the translators of that mystery. They turned chaos into pattern, despair into destiny, and though their words were often uncertain, their presence brought strange peace. As the candles flickered low and villagers returned to their homes, many tucked charms beneath their pillows, a palm leaf, a coin, or a thread blessed by a wanderer, believing that fate would watch kindly over them until morning. In the silence between the stars, they waited for tomorrow, already written in the lines of their hands, long before telescopes, long before science could name the planets or measure the stars. Medieval astrologers believed the heavens were a book written by God himself, and every comet eclipse or constellation was a word in the divine language of fate. The night sky was not an empty void. It was a living map of destiny. Each flicker of light was a sign, each orbit a message. To the medieval mind, the stars were not distant. They watched, judged, and whispered truths to those wise enough to listen. Astrology in the Middle Ages was not dismissed as superstition. It was considered a noble study, a sacred art. Monks and scholars in monasteries spent long hours copying astrological charts, translating Arabic manuscripts, and aligning celestial events with earthly affairs. Kings kept astrologers at their courts, not merely as entertainers, but as advisors who shaped decisions of war, marriage, and law. When a child was born, a horoscope was drawn immediately, not for curiosity, but to determine what kind of life the infant would lead, what virtues or curses the heavens had bestowed. Each planet carried meaning. Saturn was the bringer of trials and wisdom, a planet of sorrow that shaped philosophers and hermits. Jupiter symbolized justice and fortune, beloved by kings. Mars ruled warriors and bloodshed, while Venus governed love, beauty, and temptation. Mercury watched over scholars, travelers, and liars alike, and the moon was the mirror of emotion and change. The sun, glorious and divine, represented kingship, life, and the will of God. Together, these celestial bodies formed the medieval universe, not cold spheres of gas and rock, but divine spirits influencing all that lived. Astrologers constructed elaborate charts called nativities, marking the position of each planet at the moment of birth. From these, they drew conclusions that guided destinies. If Mars was ascendant, the child might grow brave but violent. If Venus shone strong, the heart might be soft but the will weak. The stars became a moral compass, shaping how people saw themselves and others. Even physicians used astrology, timing bloodletting and surgeries according to the phases of the moon, believing the stars governed not only fate but the body itself. When plagues swept across Europe, astrologers searched the skies for reasons. They saw omens in comets, warnings in eclipses, and alignments that foretold death. The Great Plague of 1348 was said to have been caused by a rare conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, a heavenly imbalance that poisoned the air. To the people, this explanation was not absurd. It made sense that the heavens, so vast and powerful, could alter the fragile world below. Astrology's roots reached deep into ancient civilizations, Babylon, Greece, and Egypt, but in medieval Europe, it took on a distinctly Christian form. Astrologers often insisted that their art did not contradict faith. The stars incline, they said, but do not compel, meaning that though the heavens might influence human behavior, they did not erase free will. Man could still choose righteousness or sin, yet not all were convinced. The Church walked a delicate line, tolerating astrology when it served divine understanding, condemning it when it strayed into heresy. Still, kings depended on their star readers. When Emperor Frederick II planned his campaigns, he first consulted the heavens. When Edward II of England prepared for war, his astrologer calculated favorable days for battle. Even popes employed astrologers secretly. One famous case was that of Pope Sylvester II, who had studied astrology and mathematics in Muslim Spain. Rumors spread that his knowledge came from demons, not study. But he defended himself by saying that the stars, being God's creation, were tools of divine wisdom, not temptation, in the universities of Paris and Bologna, astrology was taught alongside astronomy, medicine, and theology. Students learned to calculate planetary movements, to chart eclipses, and to interpret horoscopes. The best astrologers became celebrities of their time, men like Guido Bonotti, who advised kings, and generals or Secco d'Oscoli, who dared to predict the future too boldly and was burned for it. Their writings blended science, faith, and mysticism, forming a bridge between medieval wonder and modern reasoning. But astrology was not only for the learned. Common folk, too, looked to the skies for signs. Farmers planted by the moon, believing crops grew better under waxing light. Fishermen studied the tides and constellations, trusting that the heavens guided the sea. Lovers met when Venus was bright, believing she blessed their union. Even midwives timed births by the stars, whispering prayers that the child would be born under a lucky sign. Eclipses were moments of terror and awe. When the moon darkened the sun, people fell to their knees, fearing the end of days. Bells rang across villages to chase away evil spirits thought to swallow the light. Astrologers would calm the crowds, explaining that it was a cycle, a celestial warning, not a doom. Yet, they too felt the chill of mystery when daylight vanished and the world fell silent. The medieval heavens were not silent at all. They spoke in a language of motion and light. The astrologer was their translator. With ink-stained fingers and parchment full of symbols, he sat in candlelight, calculating destinies. His world was one of patterns, circles, and harmony. The universe, to him, was an immense clock wound by God, and each planet was a gear that moved the hands of time. Yet there were moments when even the astrologers trembled. When comets streaked across the night, they were seen as heavenly swords, cutting through fate. Monarchs feared them as omens of downfall, while the poor saw them as heralds of plague. Chroniclers recorded how, before the Black Death, a great burning star was seen in the sky, its tail stretching over the horizon. To them, it was not coincidence, it was prophecy fulfilled. Still, astrology brought comfort. In a world where life was short and unpredictable, it promised that nothing happened without meaning, that behind every loss, every triumph, there was order. People could look up at the stars and believe that someone, somewhere, had written their story with care. Astrology connected heaven and earth, body and soul, fate and faith. It made the universe intimate, a mirror reflecting human struggle and divine purpose. Even when the church scolded them, even when skeptics mocked them, astrologers kept watching, kept charting, kept believing that the stars whispered truth. And so, night after night, they climbed to the highest towers or hills, unfurled their instruments, and watched the heavens turn. They believed that by understanding the sky, they could understand the human heart. The stars were not distant suns, they were guides, ancient, watchful, eternal. For medieval people, to live was to live under the stars, to die was to return to them. And as the constellations wheeled overhead, they saw not emptiness, but destiny shining forever in the dark. In the medieval world, sleep was not merely rest, it was a doorway to revelation. The people of that age believed that dreams were messages from God, angels, or sometimes from darker forces that sought to mislead. The night was a realm where the veil between the mortal and divine thinned, where kings and peasants alike could glimpse fragments of the future through the strange, flickering visions of the mind. To dream was not random, it was communication. Every image, every shadow, every voice that echoed in one's sleep carried meaning waiting to be deciphered. Monks recorded their dreams in thick parchment journals, trying to understand what God wished to reveal. Soldiers dreamed of blood before battle, and mothers dreamed of lost children before illness struck. Entire towns would talk of a collective dream if disaster followed, a famine, a storm, a plague. Dreams were the pulse of the unseen, a form of prophecy that required interpretation by those with wisdom or divine favor. The most respected dream interpreters were often priests or scholars, who studied ancient texts such as Somniel Danielis, a popular dream manual believed to trace back to the prophet Daniel, who had interpreted dreams for Babylonian kings. This book, copied by hand and passed from monastery to monastery, contained lists of dream symbols and their supposed meanings. To dream of fire meant anger or purification, to dream of water meant cleansing or danger. To dream of teeth falling out was a warning of death in the family. Even the simplest dreams carried messages that could change the course of lives. For the peasantry, dreams were tied closely to folklore. A farmer who dreamt of a black cat prowling through his fields would wake convinced that misfortune was coming. A midwife might dream of a serpent and take it as a sign that an expectant mother carried twins. The line between superstition and faith blurred, and dreams often decided when to travel, when to harvest, even when to wed. Dreams were not dismissed as illusion, they were trusted as truth. Royal courts, too, placed great importance on dreams. Chroniclers wrote of kings who dreamed of their own downfall. King Henry I of England, for instance, was said to have dreamed of a vast wave swallowing his ships, and not long after, his only heir drowned in the White Ship disaster. The dream became legend, proof that even the mighty were warned if only they listened. Another tale told of Emperor Constantine, who saw a vision of a burning cross in his sleep before battle, along with the words in hoc signo vinces, in this sign you shall conquer. The next day, he fought under a Christian banner and won, forever changing the course of history. The medieval church held complex views on dreams. Some were divine, some were demonic. St. Augustine wrote that dreams could be sent by God as guidance, but also by the devil to tempt or confuse. Monks were trained to distinguish between holy visions and sinful illusions. Dreams that filled the heart with peace were said to be divine, those that stirred lust, fear, or vanity were whispered to be from hell. Sleep, therefore, was a battlefield where souls were tested. Pilgrims often dreamt on their journeys to holy sites, believing the saints themselves visited them through visions. One traveller to Canterbury wrote of dreaming that St. Thomas Becket laid a healing hand upon his wounds, and upon waking, he was cured. Others dreamt of angels pointing them to lost relics, or sacred springs. These stories spread by word of mouth, growing into legends that filled churches and marketplaces with awe. Dreams also carried weight in medicine. Medieval physicians, blending astrology and natural philosophy, believed dreams reflected the body's balance of humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A dream filled with heat or fire meant an excess of blood or choler. A dream of water meant coldness and phlegm. Physicians recorded their patients' dreams as clues to diagnose unseen ailments. The body and soul were one. What the body suffered, the soul revealed in sleep. But not all dreamers were noble or pure. There were those who practiced oneromancy, the art of deliberate dream divination. They used herbs like mugwort or mandrake, believed to open the mind's eye to hidden truths. Some fasted before sleep or placed sacred objects under their pillows, seeking visions of the future. Others, in darker corners of the world, whispered forbidden prayers or invoked spirits to send them dreams of power and fortune. The church condemned such practices as witchcraft, and many who dabbled in dream magic faced punishment or exile. Yet still, in secret, the tradition lived on. In remote villages, wise women, often called seers, were sought after for their gift of dream interpretation. They claimed that dreams came in three forms: the true dream sent by God, the natural dream born of one's thoughts, and the false dream sent by the devil. The true dream came rarely, often before great events. One such tale told of a miller's wife who dreamed of crows covering the sky. 2 days later, soldiers arrived and seized her village. To her people, the dream was no coincidence, it was a warning. Dreams were also woven into the fabric of art and literature. Poets like Geoffrey Chaucer and Dante Alighieri used dreams as vessels for divine messages. In the Divine Comedy, Dante's entire journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven begins as a vision. Perhaps a dream, perhaps revelation. Chaucer's Book of the Duchess begins with a sleepless narrator who falls into a dream. That leads to spiritual understanding. For medieval minds, the dream world was not fiction but an extension of the soul's reality. To dream of saints was considered a blessing, to dream of demons a test. But sometimes the two mingled. One monk wrote that in his dream, the Virgin Mary appeared radiant, holding a flaming sword, telling him to repent. But her face flickered, and beneath it, the grin of a demon emerged. He woke trembling, unsure whether he had been warned or deceived. Such was the terror and wonder of medieval dreaming. The divine and the damned were never far apart. Even death itself was often foretold in dreams. People saw candles flicker out, mirrors crack, or heard a whisper calling their name. These were taken as omens. Families would prepare, confess sins, and pray for mercy. To die after such a dream was seen as fate fulfilled, a sign that God had allowed the soul a glimpse of its own departure. Dreams unified the medieval world's sense of mystery. They were bridges between body and spirit, heaven and earth. In the silence of night, when the fires burned low and the wind whispered through stone walls, even the most skeptical hearts softened to the idea that something greater spoke in sleep. The dream to the medieval person was not fantasy. It was prophecy, memory, and warning all at once. It was a language that could not be written, only felt. And when they woke, blinking into the dim light of dawn, they carried those visions with them like fragile relics, believing that if they listened closely enough, they might hear the will of God. And so they dreamed through famine and feast, war and peace, birth and death, trusting that each dream was a star in the vast, mysterious constellation of the soul, in a world untouched by modern science, where the unseen forces of nature seemed to whisper messages to the living. Symbols and omens were the bridge between the mortal and the divine. Medieval people believed that the universe spoke in signs tiny, deliberate clues scattered across their lives. A black cat crossing one's path, a raven perched on a church spire, or a sudden storm during a wedding was never just coincidence, it was communication. Every flicker of candle flame, every pattern in spilled salt, every echo in the church bells could carry divine meaning. The educated clergy wrote treatises about how to interpret these signs, but even peasants and travelers relied on them daily, trusting the world to guide their choices. Dreams were the most personal form of symbolism. In the still of night, people believed their souls wandered the realms of spirits, glimpsing truths hidden from the waking mind. A dream of water could foretell change, a broken mirror might predict death, a snake, betrayal. Dream interpreters, often monks or wise women, analyzed these visions through centuries-old manuscripts that combined superstition, astrology, and Christian theology. The line between spiritual revelation and imagination was thin, and those who could read the signs were regarded as blessed or cursed, depending on the outcome. Animals were another major source of prophetic meaning. Birds, especially, were messengers. The flight of crows could reveal misfortune, while the song of a lark at dawn was thought to promise victory or safe travels. Fishermen in coastal towns watched gulls to predict weather, while farmers studied the behavior of oxen before planting. Even insects, like bees or crickets, carried meaning. Silence among them was considered a bad omen. Every creature was part of a grand divine script, and understanding that script meant glimpsing the will of God. Colors and numbers also spoke in mystical tones. The number 3 represented the Holy Trinity, 7 symbolized divine perfection, and 13 carried shadows of betrayal and misfortune. Red signified power and passion, while white embodied purity and spiritual truth. The medieval mind was trained to read these elements as parts of a cosmic code, one that linked heaven and earth in a continuous dialogue. Cathedrals, manuscripts, and tapestries were filled with such imagery, not just decoration, but communication. In towns and villages, omens shaped real decisions. If a candle guttered at a baptism, people whispered that the child might die young. If a rooster crowed at midnight, it foretold disaster. When comets streaked across the sky, entire kingdoms trembled, believing that kings would fall and wars would begin. Even the timing of a sneeze could be read as divine approval or warning. It might seem superstitious now, but for them, it was part of survival. Reading signs was as vital as reading the weather. Church authorities often walked a fine line between condemning and endorsing these practices. While they warned against pagan divination, they also embraced the idea that God could speak through nature. The Book of Psalms declared, "The heavens declare the glory of God," and many took this literally, so long as the interpretation was seen as seeking divine truth rather than dark magic. It was tolerated, sometimes even encouraged. Still, accusations of witchcraft or heresy lingered around those who claimed too much knowledge of fate. In illuminated manuscripts and monastic chronicles, the symbolism of omens became an art form. The Physiologus, an early Christian text, described animals and their moral meanings. A lion symbolized Christ, a serpent the devil. Knights carried heraldic emblems rich in symbolic meaning. believing that these signs offered both identity and destiny. To the medieval mind, everything visible was a metaphor for something invisible. To predict the future, one only had to learn the language of the world itself. By the late Middle Ages, as scholars began questioning the old ways, the art of reading omens slowly blended into early, natural philosophy. But even as logic rose, symbolism endured in the collective imagination. Farmers still watched the sky for signs, sailors still read the waves for warnings. The legacy of medieval symbols lives on today in lucky charms, wedding traditions, and sayings like knock on wood or bad things come in threes. These traces remind us that humanity has always sought meaning in chaos, always wanted to believe that the universe speaks to us if we only know how to listen. In the dim candlelight of stone monasteries, long before telescopes or modern observatories, monks sat hunched over parchment and ink, tracing the movements of the heavens. To the medieval world, the stars were not merely distant suns, they were divine symbols, living lights placed by God to communicate order, fate and time itself. Every glimmer in the night sky held meaning, and those who could interpret it were thought to possess sacred insight. These monastic scholars, isolated from the noise of kingdoms and wars, became the quiet astronomers of their age. They were the keepers of time, the readers of stars, and the humble scientists of faith. The Church had long understood that the heavens influenced the rhythms of prayer, harvest, and human life. Monks were tasked with creating calendars to determine feast days, solstices, and holy celebrations. They observed the stars to calculate Easter, guided by cycles of the moon and the equinox. But their curiosity often went deeper than duty. They began to record the sky's patterns with obsessive devotion, filling margins of illuminated manuscripts with drawings of constellations and notes on planetary motion. These records were not guesses, they were data collected by candlelight, with patience and reverence. At places like Cluny, Canterbury and Chartres, monastic observatories emerged centuries before Galileo's telescope. Monks used simple tools, astrolabes, quadrants, sundials to measure the angles of stars and the paths of the moon. Their purpose was not rebellion against faith but reverence for divine design. To them, every movement of the cosmos reflected God's will, and by understanding it, they drew closer to the Creator. The act of measuring stars was a form of prayer. One famous example was the Venerable Bede, an 8th century monk who wrote The Reckoning of Time, a masterpiece that combined astronomy, theology, and history. Bede mapped the calendar of the Christian world and described how the moon's cycles governed tides and seasons. He even discussed eclipses, explaining them as natural, predictable phenomena rather than dark omens. For his era, that was revolutionary. He bridged the mystical and the scientific, suggesting that to understand creation was to glorify God, not to challenge him. Other monks went further. In Ireland and the Frankish kingdoms, monastic scholars created intricate star charts based on Ptolemaic models, imported from the Islamic world. Through trade and pilgrimage, ancient Greek and Arabic astronomical knowledge seeped into Europe's monasteries. Names like Alhazen and Al-Khwarizmi appeared in Latin translations, expanding the monks' understanding of geometry and celestial motion. What began as religious duty slowly evolved into proto-science, cloaked in devotion but pulsing with curiosity. Yet, not all viewed their work kindly. Some church officials grew uneasy, fearing that studying the stars bordered on forbidden astrology, the attempt to predict human destiny through celestial signs. Astrology and astronomy were siblings then, inseparable yet morally divided. The monks insisted that their studies sought God's order, not personal fate. Still, suspicions lingered, and some manuscripts were hidden or disguised within theological commentary to escape scrutiny. Knowledge, even holy knowledge, carried risk. Despite the tension, the influence of monastic astronomers spread quietly. Their observations refined the medieval calendar, corrected errors in timekeeping, and informed navigation for explorers centuries later. The monks of the Middle Ages preserved ancient wisdom through the Dark Ages, copying texts that might otherwise have vanished forever. They saw no conflict between heaven and earth, between scripture and stars. To them, the cosmos was a cathedral of light, where every star was a sermon written by God's own hand. Their tools may have been simple, but their dedication was profound. They charted eclipses, solstices, and meteor showers, sometimes spending entire lifetimes waiting for one event to occur. In monasteries high on mountain ridges or deep in forests, they stood outside in the cold, gazing upward, counting stars with trembling fingers. They saw patterns others ignored: the rhythm of planets, the repetition of comets, the subtle waltz of constellations across the seasons. These patterns became the pulse of medieval life, guiding prayer, planting, and pilgrimage alike. Over time, the knowledge they gathered laid the foundation for Europe's awakening. Centuries later, when Renaissance scholars like Copernicus and Kepler studied the heavens, they built on the silent legacy of those monks. The monasteries had been their libraries, their data vaults, their first observatories. Without those cloistered astronomers, much of ancient star law and geometry might have been lost to fire and war. And so, while peasants read omens in the flight of birds and nobles sought fortune from alchemists, the monks looked higher to the stars themselves. They believed that by measuring the heavens, they could measure time, fate, and perhaps even the divine heartbeat of creation. For them, prediction was not sorcery. It was faith illuminated by light. In every glittering point of the night sky, they saw not randomness, but revelation. When the Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing millions and leaving entire villages silent, people searched desperately for meaning. To the medieval mind, such devastation could not be random. It had to be a message from God, a punishment, or a prophecy fulfilled. Every cough, every funeral bell, every blackened body was a sign to be read. And across Europe, prophets arose from monasteries, markets, and alleys, claiming to see the future written in the language of suffering. Before the plague, prophecy had already been a part of daily life. Traveling mystics and holy hermits spoke of visions where angels and demons revealed what was to come. But the arrival of the pestilence gave their words new weight. Fear sharpened the world's ears. From England to Italy, people gathered in cathedrals and public squares to hear preachers interpret the apocalypse. Some claimed the end of the world was near. Others said humanity was being purified for a coming age of redemption. The line between religion and superstition blurred completely, as even the most educated scholars began to quote the book of Revelation, as though it were unfolding before their eyes. Medieval chroniclers recorded comets blazing across the sky and blood-red sunsets that seemed to confirm the prophet's visions. In Germany, tales spread of ghostly horsemen galloping through the night, carrying scythes and banners of fire. In France, rumors told of children born with strange marked symbols. People said of divine wrath. The plague turned imagination into evidence, faith into fever. For the first time, the masses didn't just fear death, they feared the meaning behind it. Astrologers also joined the chorus. They studied the positions of planets and declared that Saturn and Jupiter had aligned in a cursed conjunction that unleashed disease upon the earth. Scholars in Paris even published official papers, linking the plague to corruption of the air caused by planetary influence. To a world that had no concept of bacteria or contagion, the sky itself seemed guilty. The heavens had turned hostile, and only repentance could restore balance. Yet amid the chaos, a few voices spoke with eerie calm. Monks and theologians reminded people that plagues had come before and would come again. That suffering was part of the human story. They interpreted the prophecies not as doom, but as a divine call to compassion and change. Some even predicted that once the pestilence ended, Europe would rise stronger, purified of its sins. In strange ways, they were right. The plague, horrific as it was, reshaped society, broke feudal bonds, and paved the way for the Renaissance. Still, the prophetic mania could not be contained. Flagellant movements swept across the continent, bands of men marching from town to town, whipping themselves bloody in hopes of ending divine punishment. Crowds followed them, chanting prayers, weeping, believing the end was near. When they entered cities, people fell to their knees, certain these men were messengers from God. But the church, alarmed by their extremism, condemned them as heretics. Even so, for many months, Europe seemed divided between two faiths, one of fear and one of hope. Prophets multiplied as death spread. Some claimed to dream of black angels carrying scythes. Others said they saw the Virgin Mary weeping over the world. One Italian woman, later called the Plague Prophetess, claimed to receive messages from the Archangel Michael each night. She warned that cities which did not repent would vanish. When several towns were indeed wiped out by the disease, her fame spread like wildfire. Pilgrims sought her blessing. Kings sought her counsel. The line between divine vision and coincidence blurred. Yet for every prophet of hope, there was one of despair. Some claimed to see the Antichrist born among the ashes, a ruler who would rise after the plague to enslave humanity. Others predicted new disasters, famine, earthquakes, rivers of blood. These prophecies traveled faster than any cure whispered by merchants, monks, and midwives alike. The medieval world became addicted to signs. Every eclipse, every storm, every strange birth became a prophecy waiting to be interpreted. Even after the worst of the plague passed, its prophetic shadow lingered. Artists painted frescoes of skeletal horsemen and hourglasses, reminding the living that death watched from every corner. Poets wrote verses about divine judgment and salvation. Astrologers continued to chart omens, warning that another alignment might bring the end again. The plague had changed not only bodies, but minds. It had made the future a thing to fear and to read. But hidden beneath the panic was something more profound, a new awareness of time. The plague had made people realize that history was not endless, that eras could die just as people did. Prophecy became a way to understand mortality, to give chaos a script. Even when predictions were false, they gave people a strange comfort, the sense that suffering had meaning. By the late Middle Ages, many of those prophets had faded into myth. Some were canonized as saints, others condemned as frauds, a few forgotten entirely. But their influence endured. Their visions inspired reformers, mystics, and writers for centuries to come. And though the plague eventually ended, its prophetic echoes shaped how Europe viewed the unknown forever. For in those dark years, when death walked in every street and silence filled every home, the medieval world looked into its own reflection and saw not an ending but a warning. The prophets of the plague had taught them that the future could be read not only in the stars, but in the wounds of the living, in the lessons of survival, in the fragile thread that bound life and faith together. In the candlelit chambers of medieval Europe, beneath stone arches and locked doors, men in robes bent over furnaces and strange glass vessels. Their hands, blackened with soot and mercury dust, trembled as they stirred bubbling mixtures that hissed like serpents. They called themselves alchemists, seekers of the magnum opus, the great work, the transformation of base metal into gold. But to them, gold was only half the goal. The true secret they chased was prophecy itself, the power to read the hidden order of the universe. Alchemy, to the medieval mind, was not science or sorcery alone, it was both. It blended chemistry, astrology, and spirituality into one grand philosophy. Every element, they believed, mirrored the human soul. Lead symbolized ignorance and suffering, while gold represented enlightenment and purity. To turn one into the other was to uncover divine truth. And if you could read that process, you could read the future. The great alchemists, men like Roger Bacon, Albertus Magnus, and later Paracelsus, believed that the universe was alive, its patterns written in secret languages of number and symbol. They studied the movement of planets and the behavior of fire, convinced that both obeyed the same cosmic rules. To predict the future was to decode those rules, to glimpse the machinery of God. Their laboratories were as much temples as workshops. Every flask, every flame, every drop of mercury was part of a ritual that joined matter and spirit. Legends whispered that some alchemists had achieved visions beyond human sight. They claimed to see the births of stars in droplets of molten metal, to hear whispers from angels in the hiss of boiling water. Others swore that by consuming carefully prepared elixirs, they entered trances where the veil of time lifted. In such states, they described futures that later came to pass: kings dying in battle, cities consumed by fire, empires collapsing under their own greed. Whether coincidence or clairvoyance, people listened. In an age where miracles and mysteries shared the same breath, the line between experiment and prophecy was invisible. The church regarded alchemy with suspicion, but also fascination. Some monks practiced it in secret, believing it a path to understanding creation itself. After all, if God had made the world from chaos, was not the alchemist imitating the divine act by transforming chaos into order? The monastery's libraries hid volumes of alchemical lore coded in strange Latin, and ciphered symbols to protect them from being misunderstood. But even hidden knowledge has a way of spreading. Nobles began to fund alchemists, seeking eternal life or the power to foresee political destiny. Gold and prophecy became twin obsessions of the powerful. In the royal courts of France and England, alchemists performed secret demonstrations. They would heat metals until they shimmered with impossible colors, claiming these hues revealed the fates of kingdoms. Blue meant peace, red meant bloodshed, black meant betrayal. Kings leaned forward in awe, desperate for hints of what was to come. Some of these predictions proved chillingly accurate: an assassination, a failed crusade, a plague outbreak cementing the alchemist's reputation as a man who could speak the language of destiny. But alchemy's true prophecies were not of war or treasure. They were about transformation of the self, of humanity's understanding. The alchemist's furnace symbolized the heart. The lead represented ignorance, the gold was wisdom. To know the stone, said the texts, one must first purify the soul. Many alchemists recorded dreams in which they met radiant beings, who told them secrets in riddles. Those dreams often became the basis for new experiments, and for prophecies disguised as chemical formulae. Some alchemists claimed to have glimpsed the philosopher, stone, the mythical substance that could transmute metals and grant immortality. But others said, the stone was not a thing, but a state of being. To possess it was to awaken divine understanding, to see past illusion and into eternity. In this enlightened state, they believed, one could see the threads of time itself, knowing the outcome of all things. A few left cryptic journals describing visions of flying machines, vast cities of glass, and metal men serving humans images that eerily resembled the modern world, centuries before it existed. Of course, for every genuine seeker, there were charlatans. The promise of gold and foresight attracted greed. False alchemists duped nobles with trick furnaces and hidden gold powder, pretending to perform miracles. When caught, they were imprisoned or worse, burned as heretics. These frauds tainted alchemy's reputation, casting doubt on those who pursued it sincerely. Yet, even in disgrace, the legend of prophetic alchemy endured. The idea that matter could reveal fate was too seductive, too dire. By the late Middle Ages, alchemy began merging with early natural science. True scholars started to strip away mysticism, focusing on measurable results. But the prophetic core never disappeared, it merely transformed. Where alchemists once saw divine symbols, scientists saw patterns, laws, and cause and effect. In a way, they continued the same pursuit, understanding the invisible in order to predict the visible. Still, many manuscripts survived that spoke of alchemy's prophetic visions. One, found in Prague centuries later, described a red star rising in the west that will turn man's tools against him, a chilling image modern readers associate with war. Another claimed that when lead no longer weighed down the earth, humanity would ascend a metaphor some interpret as the age of flight, whether coincidence or uncanny foresight. These writings remind us how deeply the medieval imagination reached into time's shadow. Even now, historians studying those manuscripts find strange parallels between their symbolism and modern discoveries. The idea of transformation energy changing form, matter releasing light echoes the principles of atomic theory. What the alchemists called transmutation, we call nuclear reaction. What they sought in the philosopher's stone, we find in the understanding of physics and psychology alike. They were wrong in method but right in mystery. The future can be shaped when one understands the hidden patterns of the world. So, when a medieval alchemist gazed into a glowing crucible, seeing the flicker of gold in molten lead, perhaps he wasn't merely seeing metal change. Perhaps he saw a reflection of humanity's own fate, the belief that with enough wisdom, we could transform darkness into light, ignorance into knowledge, and fear into prophecy. That was the true secret of alchemy, not the making of gold, but the awakening of vision. In the hushed silence of medieval nights, when candles burned low and the world outside was shrouded in mist, dreams were not dismissed as illusions, they were gateways. To medieval people, The dream world was a threshold between earth and heaven, between the living and the divine. They believed that when the body slept, the soul wandered freely, visiting realms where time flowed differently, where past, present, and future intertwined like threads in an invisible loom. Dreaming, to them, was not a passive act, it was a sacred journey. And for those who could interpret it, the future revealed itself in symbols. Every monastery, court, and village had its dream interpreters, men and women who could read the hidden meaning of sleep. Dream books or somnia manuals circulated in whispered secrecy. One of the most famous was the Somniale Danielus, attributed to the biblical prophet Daniel himself, who had once interpreted the dreams of kings. The book listed hundreds of dream symbols and their supposed meanings. To dream of fire meant conflict. To dream of water meant emotion or healing. To dream of teeth falling out foretold death or great change. But beyond simple omens, the art of dream prophecy was considered divine communion, a dialogue between mortal and cosmic forces. Kings and popes relied on dream interpreters as much as on generals. Before great battles, monarchs would fast, pray, and ask for a guiding vision. Chronicles tell of Henry I dreaming of the sea swallowing his sons the night. Before the white ship disaster that indeed claimed their lives, Joan of Arc claimed to have received visions in dreams and waking trances, guided by saints who foretold her destiny. Even peasants, illiterate and unseen by history, spoke of dreams that warned them of famine, plague, or the death of loved ones. For the medieval mind, the dream realm was not imagination, it was revelation. Monks believed dreams could come from three sources: the body, the mind, or the divine. Bodily dreams, they said, were caused by indigestion or illness, mere nonsense of the flesh. Mental dreams arose from worry, guilt, or desire, shadows of the waking mind. But divine dreams, those rare, luminous experiences, were messages from angels or God himself. These dreams were often vivid and symbolic. A tower crumbling might mean the fall of a king. A garden blooming in winter could signify the birth of a prophet. Such visions were recorded carefully in illuminated manuscripts, decorated with gold leaf as if to preserve their holiness. Dreams also guided healers and scholars. Physicians in the Middle Ages studied their patients' dreams to diagnose imbalances in the humors. A dream of burning might indicate excess choler, a dream of drowning too much phlegm. Alchemists, too, saw dreams as part of their experiments. They believed the subconscious could reveal truths that reason could not. One alchemist wrote that he saw, in a dream, a red lion devouring the sun, a symbol that led him to create a mixture that glowed faintly in the dark, centuries before luminescent reactions were understood. In villages, wise women interpreted dreams for protection and harvest. A farmer might dream of crows circling his field, and she would tell him to burn sage at the boundaries to ward off blight. A mother might dream of her child lost in fog, and the woman would instruct her to place a charm under the pillow woven with rosemary and prayer. Such acts mixed faith, superstition, and deep human hope, the same impulse that drives all prophecy. Some dreams were collective. During the years of the Black Death, countless records tell of entire towns dreaming of dark-robed figures walking the streets. Before plague arrived, chroniclers described them as the messengers of night, symbols of the coming shadow. Whether these were coincidences or reflections of fear, the people believed their dreams had spoken the truth. And when dreams and reality merged, prophecy felt undeniable. The church both feared and respected dream prophecy. Saints like Hildegard of Bingen claimed divine visions that later proved eerily prescient. Warnings of political corruption, natural disasters, and reform movements centuries before they came. Her dreams, filled with color and sound, were said to contain music no one had ever heard before. Yet, at the same time, the church warned against trusting dreams too easily. Demons, it was said, could disguise themselves as angels, twisting the dreamer's mind with false visions. To discern divine prophecy from deception required purity, humility, and prayer. Only those with faith could read the truth of their dreams. Dream prophecy reached its height in the late medieval period, when mystics recorded their visions in volumes that blended poetry and revelation. They described seeing great wheels of fire turning in the heavens, of stars falling like tears, of iron birds flying through the sky. These descriptions, long thought symbolic, sound eerily like modern inventions, the airplane. the explosion, the age of machines. Some modern scholars suggest that these visions were simply metaphors, but others wonder if they were glimpses of future epochs perceived through dream logic. Then came the Renaissance, and with it, the dawn of reason. Dreams were reclassified from messages to metaphors, from prophecy to psychology. The art of dream divination was dismissed, its practitioners mocked or persecuted. Yet even as the world turned toward science, the fascination with prophetic dreams never fully vanished. Kings still dreamt before wars, commoners still whispered about their visions. And centuries later, the study of dreams returned through Freud, Jung, and modern psychology, revealing once again that the sleeping mind holds truths the waking one cannot grasp. But in the quiet corners of old Europe, in forgotten libraries and dust-covered abbeys, manuscripts still rest filled with symbols, notes, and dream diaries written in Latin, Old English, or cryptic sigils. These forgotten pages speak of men and women who saw more than they could explain, who recorded visions of cities built of glass, of diseases that spread through invisible air, of stars that hum with energy. Whether divine revelation or subconscious insight, their accuracy is haunting. The medieval dream prophets may have lacked science, but they possessed imagination and faith to forces that can sometimes see farther than logic. In their dreams, they glimpsed possibilities beyond their time, echoes of futures yet unborn. They believed that destiny spoke softly, in images and riddles to those who dared to listen. And perhaps, in their humble way, they were right. For even now, in the modern world of data and machines, we still dream. We still wake from visions that feel like warnings, like memories from tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, those medieval souls who once looked to their dreams for truth were not so different from us. They too longed to know what lay ahead, to find comfort in meaning, to turn fear into foresight. So as the candle of history burns low, we remember them, the monks and mystics, the peasants and queens, the dreamers who believed the future could be seen behind closed eyes. Their art may be lost, but their wisdom endures. The future is never entirely hidden. Sometimes it comes to us softly in sleep, wrapped in the language of dreams, waiting for those who still dare to believe.